The blood on Tessa Reid's hands had long since dried, but she still saw it every time she closed her eyes, staining her palms with memories that water could never wash away. She stood at the edge of Spokane, Washington in the summer of 1882, watching dust devils dance across the road that had carried her here from Montana, where everything she had tried to build had turned to ash and regret. The general store needed someone to work the counter, according to the faded notice in the window, and Tessa needed a reason to stay in one place long enough to forget her own name. She pushed through the door, making the bell jangle overhead, and found herself facing a weathered man with kind eyes who introduced himself as Mr. Hutchins. He looked at her face, at the hollow places grief had carved beneath her cheekbones, and asked only two questions. Could she read and write, and could she start tomorrow? When she said yes to both, he nodded and told her there was a boarding house 2 streets over run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson who kept clean rooms and asked few questions. That night, Tessa lay in a narrow bed that smelled of lye soap and listened to the sounds of Spokane settling into darkness. Somewhere down the street, a piano played a melody that made her throat tight. She had not cried since the night her husband died, since the night she had held the laudanum bottle in shaking hands and made a choice that still haunted every waking moment. The doctor had said it would ease his pain. The doctor had been wrong about so many things. Morning came with harsh sunlight and the smell of coffee drifting up from Mrs. Patterson's kitchen. Tessa dressed in one of her 2 good dresses, a simple gray cotton that had seen better days, and braided her dark hair with mechanical precision. In the mirror, her reflection looked like a stranger, a woman with brown eyes that had forgotten how to reflect light properly, how to show anything but the careful blankness she had perfected. The general store opened at 7, and Tessa arrived at 1:45, ready to prove herself useful enough to keep. Mr. Hutchins showed her where everything was kept, how he liked the account books maintained, and which customers could be trusted to pay their tabs and which required cash on the barrel. It was simple work, the kind that kept her hands busy and her mind carefully empty. She had been there 3 hours when the cowboy walked in. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who knew exactly who he was and felt no need to apologize for it. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and hair the color of wheat at harvest time, he carried himself like someone who had spent more time under open sky than under roof. His clothes were dusty from the trail, his boots worn but well-maintained, and his hat shadowed eyes that were an unexpected shade of blue-green, like river water in summer. "Morning," he said, his voice a low rumble that somehow managed to be both polite and entirely self-assured. "I am looking for lamp oil and coffee, the strong kind if you have got it." Tessa pointed to the shelves without meeting his eyes directly. "Lamp oil is on the left, 3 shelves up. Coffee is in the tin containers along the back wall. We have got 2 kinds. The stronger one has the red label." He nodded his thanks and moved through the store with the purposeful efficiency of someone who did not waste time or energy on unnecessary motion. She went back to the account book she had been reviewing, but found herself aware of his presence in a way that made her uncomfortable. It had been so long since she had noticed another person as anything other than a necessary part of continuing to exist. When he brought his purchases to the counter, she tallied them quickly and told him the price. His hands, she noticed, were scarred and calloused, the hands of someone who worked for his living. He paid in coins that clinked as he counted them out, and then he did something unexpected. He looked directly at her face, really looked, and his expression shifted into something that might have been recognition, though not the kind that came from having met before. "You are new in town," he said. It was not a question. "I am," Tessa replied, keeping her voice neutral. Well, welcome to Spokane. It is a decent place as towns go. People here mostly mind their own business but will help if you need it. He gathered his purchases. Name is Kane Sullivan. I have got a ranch about 5 miles north of here. If you ever need anything, you can ask for me. Before she could respond, before she could tell him she would not need anything from anyone, he had tipped his hat and walked back out into the sunshine, leaving her standing behind the counter with an odd feeling in her chest that she could not quite name. Mr. Hutchins emerged from the back room where he had been organizing stock. "That is Kane Sullivan," he said, as if the name should mean something. "His father started the Sullivan Ranch 30 years back. Kane runs it now, has for the past 5 years since his father passed. Good man. Fair to his workers, pays his debts on time, does not start trouble but finishes it if someone brings it to his door. You will see him in here every few weeks when he comes to town for supplies." Tessa nodded and went back to the account books, determined to think nothing more about Kane Sullivan or his unexpected kindness. But she thought about him anyway, in the quiet moments when her guard was down. She thought about the way he had looked at her, not with pity or judgment, but with a kind of understanding that made her want to both run away and step closer. She thought about his voice, and the easy way he moved, and the fact that he had welcomed her to a town where she was a stranger without asking why she had come or what she was running from. 3 weeks passed before she saw him again. In that time, she had settled into a routine that felt almost normal. Wake before dawn, dress, eat whatever Mrs. Patterson had prepared for breakfast, walk to the general store, work until closing, return to her room, lie awake until exhaustion finally dragged her under. It was not a life, exactly, but it was existence, and that was more than she had managed in the months after Robert died. She was restocking shelves on a Thursday afternoon when the bell above the door jangled. She turned, expecting one of the regular customers, and found Kane Sullivan standing in the doorway with blood soaking through the left sleeve of his shirt. "I apologize for the mess," he said, his voice tight with pain but still somehow courteous. "I had a disagreement with a section of fence that was not inclined to cooperate. Mr. Hutchins around." "He went to make a delivery," Tessa said, already moving toward him. "Sit down before you fall down." To her surprise, he obeyed, lowering himself onto the wooden chair near the counter with a carefulness that told her the injury was worse than he was letting on. She grabbed clean rags from the stack Mr. Hutchins kept for wrapping fragile items and approached him with hands that only shook a little. "I need to see it," she said. He hesitated for a moment, then shrugged out of his vest and began unbuttoning his shirt with his right hand. The left hung awkwardly at his side. Tessa helped him ease the fabric away from the wound, and her breath caught at what she saw. A long, ragged tear ran from his shoulder to halfway down his upper arm, deep enough that she could see the white of fascia beneath the welling blood. "This needs stitches," she said. "You need a doctor. Dr. Pemberton is in Cheney today, will not be back until tomorrow." Kane's jaw was set in a hard line. "I can ride back to the ranch and have my foreman's wife look at it. She has stitched me up before. 5 miles on horseback bleeding like this. You would be unconscious before you made it halfway." Tessa heard her own voice taking on the crisp, authoritative tone she had learned during the 2 years she had helped her aunt run a boarding house in St. Louis, back when life still made sense. "I can do it. I have stitched wounds before." His eyes searched her face. "You are sure?" She was not sure of anything, but she nodded anyway. "Stay here. Do not move." She found Mr. Hutchins' medical supplies in the back room, the basic kit most storekeepers kept for emergencies. Needle and thread, carbolic acid for cleaning, strips of clean cotton for bandaging. Her hands remembered what to do even as her mind tried to retreat from the memory of the last time she had done this, of Robert's fevered skin beneath her fingers, and the hopeless battle against infection that no amount of cleanliness could win. When she returned, Kane was exactly where she had left him, his face pale but composed. She set up her supplies on the counter and positioned the lamp to give herself enough light to work by. "This will hurt," she warned him. "Most things worth doing hurt a little," he replied. "Go ahead." She cleaned the wound first with carbolic acid, and to his credit, he barely flinched even though she knew it must have burned like hellfire. Then she threaded the needle with steady hands and began to stitch. He watched her work with eyes that never wavered, never showed anything but a calm acceptance of necessary pain. "You have done this before," he said after she had completed the first few stitches. "My husband was a farmer in Montana," Tessa heard herself say, the words coming out before she could stop them. "He was always getting cut or scraped or kicked by something. I learned to stitch him back together." "Was," Kane repeated softly. "I am sorry." She did not respond, focusing instead on the precise work of pulling flesh together, making each stitch as neat and small as possible. The scar would be significant regardless, but there was no reason to make it worse through careless work. "How did he die?" Kane asked after a long silence. "If you do not mind my asking." Tessa's hands paused for the briefest moment before continuing. No one had asked her that directly before. Everyone in the last town had known, had heard the story in all its terrible detail. Here, she was anonymous, and she could have told him anything. Could have said it was fever or accident or any of the 1,000 things that killed men on the frontier. Instead, she told him the truth. Pneumonia. It started as a cough, just a little thing, but it got worse and then worse again. By the time we got him to a doctor, it was too late. His lungs were filling with fluid faster than we could drain them. She tied off another stitch, snipped the thread. He was in so much pain toward the end, gasping for every breath. The doctor gave me laudanum to help him sleep, told me to give him a spoonful every 4 hours as needed. Her voice remained steady, clinical. She had learned how to talk about this without breaking, how to make it just another story that had happened to someone else. The last night he was suffering so badly, begging me to make it stop, so I gave him the medicine. And then, an hour later, when he was still in pain, I gave him more, and more. She finished the last stitch and tied it off with more force than necessary. By morning, he was dead. The doctor said I had given him too much, that I should have waited longer between doses, that I had made a mistake. The words hung in the air between them, stark and unforgiving. She began bandaging the wound with careful, precise movements, unable to look at Kane's face, unable to bear whatever expression might be there. "You were trying to ease his suffering," Kane said quietly. "I killed him," Tessa replied, her voice flat. "Whether I meant to or not, my hand was the one that gave him the dose that stopped his heart. That is the truth of it." "Is that why you left Montana?" "His family blamed me. Said I had murdered him for the farm, even though there was nothing left but debt by the time he died. The sheriff investigated, questioned me for hours. In the end, they ruled it accidental death, but no one believed it. I could see it in their faces, could hear them whispering behind their hands. So I sold what little we had and left." She finished tying off the bandage and stepped back, finally meeting his eyes. She expected disgust or horror, or at the very least the kind of wary distance people put between themselves and things they did not understand. Instead, she found something that looked almost like compassion. "My mother died when I was 12, Kane said. "Influenza. She was sick for 2 weeks, getting weaker every day. Near the end, my father gave her morphine for the pain. The last dose was bigger than the ones before. I remember because I was in the room when he did it. I remember watching him measure it out, watching him look at her face, so gray and drawn, and then watching him add just a little more to the spoon before he gave it to her. He paused, his eyes distant with memory. She died an hour later. Peaceful finally, not fighting for breath anymore. My father never spoke of it and I never asked, but I was old enough to understand what I had seen. Sometimes mercy looks like a hard choice. That does not make it murder. Tessa's throat tightened. The doctor said I should have waited. The doctor was not the one watching someone they loved suffer, Kane replied. You did what you thought was right in a moment when there were no good choices. You carry that weight, and I imagine you will for the rest of your life. But that does not make you a murderer. It makes you someone who loved enough to take the burden of that decision onto yourself. Something broke open inside her chest, some tightly sealed place where she had locked away every feeling except guilt. Her eyes burned, but she blinked the tears back furiously. I do not deserve to feel better about it, she said. I do not deserve to forgive myself. Maybe not, Kane said, standing slowly and testing the movement of his injured arm. But you deserve to live. You deserve to have more than grief and guilt. He looked at her for a long moment, and there was something in his expression that made her breath catch. You deserve happiness, Tessa Reid, even if you cannot see it right now. She shook her head. I do not deserve happiness. Kane moved closer carefully, as if approaching a wounded animal. When he spoke, his voice was low and intent, carrying the weight of absolute certainty. Then let me deserve you instead. The words hung between them, unexpected and impossible. Tessa stared at him, unable to form a response, unable to understand what he was offering or why. I am sorry, Kane said after a moment, stepping back. That was forward of me. You have shown me kindness and I have repaid it by making you uncomfortable. I will pay for the supplies and the doctoring and leave you in peace. No, Tessa said, surprising herself. I mean, you did not make me uncomfortable. I am just not sure I understand what you meant. Kane was quiet for a moment, considering his words. I meant that if you cannot forgive yourself, if you cannot believe you deserve good things, then let me be the one to deserve your presence in my life. Let me earn the right to know you, to talk with you, to perhaps become someone you might trust. You do not have to deserve happiness for me to want to help you find it anyway. It was the most extraordinary thing anyone had ever said to her. It was also possibly the most confusing. Why? She asked simply. Because I recognize the look in your eyes, Kane said. I have seen it in the mirror enough times. Loss leaves a mark. So does guilt, even when it should not. You do not know me and you have no reason to trust me. But I would like to give you reasons, if you are willing to let me try. Before Tessa could respond, the bell above the door jangled and Mr. Hutchins came in, stopping short at the sight of blood-stained rags on his counter and Kane Sullivan standing far too close to his new clerk. What in heaven's name happened here? He demanded. Fence disagreement, Kane said easily, stepping back to a more respectable distance. Miss Reid was kind enough to stitch me up rather than let me bleed all over your floor on the way to the doctor. I owe her for the supplies and her time. Mr. Hutchins' eyes moved between them, clearly trying to assess the situation. Finally, he shrugged. Well, I am grateful you did not bleed on the floor. Tessa, go ahead and tally up what you used. Kane, you look like you could use some coffee before you ride back out. I thank you, but I should get back, Kane said. My foreman will wonder what happened to me. He paid for his original purchases plus the medical supplies, added an extra $1 that Tessa tried to refuse and he insisted she take, and headed for the door. At the threshold, he turned back. There is a barn dance Saturday week at the Richardson place. The whole town usually turns out. If you are inclined to come, I would be pleased to see you there. Then he was gone, leaving Tessa holding a dollar coin and a tangle of feelings she had no idea what to do with. Mr. Hutchins waited until Kane was well and truly gone before speaking. "He is a good man," he said quietly. "Best in this county, to my thinking. But if his attention is unwelcome, you tell me and I will make sure he understands to leave you be." "No," Tessa said, still staring at the door. "It is not unwelcome. It is just unexpected." "Best things usually are," Mr. Hutchins replied. "Now, let us clean up this mess before anyone else comes in and gets the wrong idea." The next 10 days passed in a strange state of suspension. Tessa worked, ate, slept, and went through all the motions of normal life. But underneath it all ran a current of anticipation that she could not quite suppress. Kane Sullivan's words kept echoing in her mind. "Then let me deserve you instead." She had turned the phrase over and over, trying to understand what he meant, trying to decide if she dared to find out. Part of her wanted to hide in her room Saturday night, to avoid the dance and the possibility of whatever might happen there. But a smaller, quieter part of her, a part she had thought dead, whispered that maybe she had been hiding long enough. Saturday came with clear skies and warm evening air. Mrs. Patterson, who had heard about the dance from one of her other boarders, insisted that Tessa should go. "You are young," the widow said firmly. "You have had sorrow and I can see it on you, but sorrow is not all there is to life, and sitting in this room every night will not bring back what you lost. Go, dance, talk to people, remind yourself what it feels like to be alive." So Tessa put on her better dress, a dark blue cotton with small buttons down the front, and braided her hair in a crown around her head. In the mirror, she looked almost like the woman she had been 3 years ago, before Robert got sick, before everything fell apart. The Richardson place was 3 miles out of town, a prosperous farm with a big barn that had been cleared out and decorated with paper lanterns for the occasion. By the time Tessa arrived in the wagon Mrs. Patterson had arranged for her boarders to share, the party was in full swing. Music poured out of the open barn doors, fiddle and guitar and someone keeping time on what sounded like a washtub bass. People crowded the space, dancing and talking and laughing with the easy familiarity of a community that knew itself well. Tessa stood at the edge of the gathering, suddenly uncertain. She did not know these people. She had no place here. This had been a mistake. "You came." She turned to find Kane standing beside her, clean and shaven and dressed in clothes that, while still simple, were clearly his best. His left arm hung a little stiffly at his side, but the bandage was hidden beneath his sleeve and he moved with only slight caution. "I was not sure I would," Tessa admitted. "I am glad you did." He offered his right hand. "Would you dance with me?" Fair warning, I am not much of a dancer even when I've got both arms working proper. With this one still healing, I am liable to be downright clumsy. But I would like to try anyway if you are willing. Tessa looked at his outstretched hand, at the honest hope in his expression, and made a choice. She placed her hand in his. He led her into the barn and onto the makeshift dance floor where other couples swirled and turned to a lively reel. True to his word, Kane was not an elegant dancer, but he was steady and sure, and he held her with a careful respect that made her feel safe in a way she had not expected. They moved together through the pattern of the dance, and Tessa found herself almost smiling as he concentrated with serious intensity on not stepping on her feet. When the song ended, they were both slightly out of breath. Kane led her to the side where tables held punch and cookies donated by various townswomen. "You survived," he said, handing her a cup of punch. "Barely," she replied, and was startled to realize she was teasing him. They stood together in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the other dancers. Then Kane said, "I have been thinking about what you told me, about your husband and what happened." Tessa stiffened. You do not need to say anything about that. I know. But I want to tell you something anyway, if you will listen. He turned to face her fully. My father drank himself to death over the course of 3 years after my mother died. Did it slow enough that each day looked almost like the last, until one morning we found him in his chair with an empty bottle beside him and no breath left in his lungs. I was the one who found him. Tessa's hand tightened on her cup. For a long time I blamed myself, Kane continued. Thought that if I had been a better son, a stronger help, he would not have needed the whiskey so much. I carried that guilt around like a stone in my pocket, pulling it out to examine it every chance I got. My foreman finally got tired of watching me torture myself and told me something I have never forgotten. What did he say? He said that some people are drowning, and no matter how hard you swim toward them, no matter how strong you are or how desperately you want to save them, they will pull you under if you are not careful. He said the only thing I could do was make sure I did not drown alongside them, and then forgive myself for still being able to breathe. Kane's eyes met hers, sea blue and sincere. You could not save your husband, Tessa. The pneumonia was killing him no matter what you did. What you did at the end was mercy, not murder, and spending the rest of your life drowning in guilt will not bring him back. It will just mean 2 people died instead of 1. Tessa felt tears burning at the corners of her eyes. I do not know how to stop feeling this way. I do not imagine you can just stop, but maybe you can start carrying it different. Not as a stone meant to drag you down, but as a scar that reminds you that you survived something hard. He hesitated, then added quietly, and maybe you can let someone help carry it with you if you were willing to trust them with that. Why would you want to? Tessa asked. You barely know me. I would like to know you better, Kane said simply. If you would let me. No promises, no expectations. Just a chance to see if maybe we could be friends at least. And if it becomes more than that, well, I would not object. It was too much, too fast. Tessa had not come to Spokane looking for this. She had come looking for a place to hide, to fade into the background of someone else's life and never be noticed. Kane Sullivan was offering her the exact opposite. I am not good at being close to people anymore, she said. I do not know if I remember how. Then we will figure it out together, Kane replied. I am not exactly an expert myself, but I am patient and I am stubborn, and I think maybe you are worth the effort of trying. Before Tessa could respond, someone called Kane's name from across the barn. He grimaced slightly. That is my foreman. Probably wants to introduce me to his wife's cousin who just moved here from Oregon. He has been trying to matchmake for the past year. He looked at Tessa with a slight smile. Would you mind if I told him I am already spoken for? Even if it is not precisely true yet, it might save us both some awkwardness. Us both? Tessa asked. My foreman's wife's cousin is reportedly very determined and very talkative. I have been avoiding meeting her for 6 months now. His smile widened a fraction. But if I could truthfully say I am courting someone, it would let everyone off the hook gracefully. It was a ridiculous situation. Tessa barely knew this man. She had no business agreeing to anything that sounded even remotely like courtship. She was broken in ways she was not sure could be fixed, carrying guilt that should not be his problem, and in no state to offer anyone anything resembling a future. All right, she heard herself say. Kane's expression transformed into something bright and genuine, a smile that reached all the way to his eyes and made him look younger, lighter. All right, Tessa confirmed, feeling reckless and terrified and strangely alive. But we go slow. And if I decide this is too much, you respect that and back away. Done, Kane said immediately. Slow as you need, and the moment you tell me to back away, I will. He offered his hand again, formal this time, as if sealing a business arrangement. Deal. Tessa shook his hand, feeling the warm strength of his grip, the calluses that spoke of hard work and honest living. Deal. The foreman, a weathered man named Jack Tanner, was indeed eager to introduce Kane to his wife's cousin, a pleasant-faced woman named Sarah who smiled determinedly at Kane until he politely explained that he was already keeping company with someone. Sarah's smile faded into disappointment, but she recovered quickly and moved on to scan the room for other prospects. Jack Tanner, however, looked at Tessa with open curiosity. "You are the one from the general store, right? Heard you stitched up the boss's arm pretty as you please." "Word travels fast," Tessa said. "Small town," Jack replied with a shrug. "Not much else to talk about most days. You planning on staying in Spokane then?" "For now," Tessa said. "Good. Town could use more people with useful skills and sense enough to use them." He nodded approvingly, then turned to Kane. "You feeling all right? That arm giving you trouble?" "It is fine, Jack. Stop fussing." "Someone's got to. You would work yourself into the ground if we let you." Jack's expression was gruff but affectionate. "Dance is winding down in another hour or so." "You need help getting home, Miss Reid." "I came with Mrs. Patterson's group," Tessa said. "I will ride back with them." "I will make sure she gets to the wagon safe," Kane added. Jack nodded and wandered off, leaving Kane and Tessa standing together in the companionable chaos of the barn dance. They danced twice more, talked with various townspeople who drifted over to introduce themselves or renew acquaintance with Kane, and shared cookies that were slightly burnt on the bottom but tasted sweet anyway. When Mrs. Patterson began gathering her boarders for the ride back to town, Kane walked Tessa out to the wagon. The night had cooled, and stars scattered across the sky in brilliant profusion, more stars than seemed possible. "I usually come to town on Saturdays for supplies," Kane said as he helped her up into the wagon bed. "Would you mind if I stopped by to say hello? Maybe take you to lunch at the hotel dining room if you get a break?" "I would not mind," Tessa said, and realized she meant it. His smile was soft and pleased. "Then I will see you next Saturday, Tessa Reid." She watched him disappear into the darkness as the wagon rolled toward town, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, the tightness in her chest eased just a little. Saturday became the day Tessa looked forward to instead of simply enduring. Kane came to town like clockwork, arriving at the general store mid-morning with his list of supplies and an easy greeting. They would talk while she filled his order, careful conversations about small things at first. The weather, the ranch, how business was at the store. Gradual as summer turning to fall, the conversations deepened. He told her about growing up on the ranch, about learning to rope and ride before he could properly raid, about his mother's garden and his father's dreams of building something lasting. She told him about her childhood in St. Louis, about working in her aunt's boarding house, about meeting Robert at a church social and thinking he was the steadiest man she had ever met. "Was he good to you?" Kane asked one Saturday in September while they sat at a corner table in the hotel dining room, eating roast chicken and potatoes. Tessa considered the question. "He was kind, he worked hard, he never raised a hand to me or spoke cruel words, but he was not easy to know. He kept his thoughts to himself, and he did not like it when I asked too many questions about what he was feeling." "Sounds lonely," Kane observed. "It was," Tessa admitted. "But I told myself that was just how marriage was, companionable but not particularly close." "It does not have to be that way," Kane said quietly. "How would you know? You have never been married, true enough, but I have seen marriages that look different. My parents, before my mother got sick, they talked about everything, laughed together. My father would catch her around the waist while she was cooking and make her dance with him right there in the kitchen for no reason except that he wanted to. Kane's expression was distant with memory. That is what I always figured marriage should look like, partnership and passion both. That sounds exhausting, Tessa said, but she was smiling slightly. Maybe, Kane agreed, but the good kind of exhausting. The kind where you fall into bed tired but content, because you have spent the day with someone who makes life bigger instead of smaller. It was a pretty picture, and Tessa was not sure she believed in it anymore, but she liked that Kane did. She liked the way his face lit up when he talked about things that mattered to him, the way his hands moved to illustrate a point, the way he listened when she spoke as if her words were important. October brought cooler weather and the first hints of color in the leaves. Kane invited Tessa to visit the ranch, and after some hesitation, she agreed. Mrs. Patterson loaned her a side saddle, and on a bright Sunday afternoon, Tessa rode out of town following Kane's sure lead. The Sullivan Ranch sprawled across a valley 5 miles north of Spokane, bordered by pine-covered hills and bisected by a clear running creek. The main house was sturdy timber construction, 2 stories with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and side. Barns and outbuildings clustered nearby, all well-maintained and prosperous-looking. Cattle dotted the pastures, sleek and healthy, and horses grazed in a corral near the barn. "It is beautiful," Tessa said, meaning it. "It is home," Kane replied simply. "Come on, I will introduce you to everyone." The foreman, Jack Tanner, lived in a smaller house near the main barn with his wife Mary and their 3 children. Mary was a practical woman with a warm smile and flour on her apron, and she welcomed Tessa like an old friend. The ranch hands, 5 men who worked the land and the cattle, were polite and respectful, clearly curious about the woman their boss was courting but too well-mannered to ask intrusive questions. Kane showed her around the property, pointing out features with quiet pride. The stable where he kept his personal horses, the smithy where they did their own ironwork, the smokehouse and root cellar, the vegetable garden that had been his mother's and that Mary Tanner now tended, producing enough to feed everyone through the winter. "Your father built something lasting," Tessa said. "He did," Kane agreed. "And I am trying to honor that, keep it going, make it better where I can." He paused, looking out across the valley. "I always figured I would get married someday, have children to pass all this to. But I never met anyone who made me want to actually do it, not until recently." His eyes met hers, and Tessa felt her pulse quicken. "Kane," she said carefully, "we have been keeping company for 6 weeks. That is not very long. Long enough to know what I want," he replied. "But I am not asking for anything you are not ready to give, Tessa. I am just telling you what I am thinking so you know where I stand." She looked away, overwhelmed. "I am not sure I can be what you want." "You are already what I want," Kane said. "Exactly as you are." "You do not know me well enough to say that." "Then let me know you better." He moved closer, careful not to crowd her. "Let me keep coming to town on Saturdays. Let me write you letters during the week. Let me show you that I am serious about this, about you." Tessa's hands twisted together. "What if I cannot love you back the way you deserve?" "Then at least we will have tried," Kane said. "And you will have had someone who loved you anyway for as long as you let him." It was too much honesty, too much vulnerability laid bare. Tessa wanted to run, to protect herself from the possibility of failing him, of hurting him the way she had hurt Robert by not being enough. But she also wanted to stay. Wanted to believe that maybe, impossibly, she could have this. "All right," she whispered. "Keep coming to town. Write me letters. We will see what happens." Kane's smile was like sunrise. "That is all I am asking for." They stayed at the ranch until early evening, eating dinner with the Tanners and their children, talking and laughing around a table that felt like family. When Kane rode back to town with her, the moon was rising over the hills and the air smelled of wood smoke and coming winter. At Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, Kane helped Tessa dismount and walked her to the door. "Thank you for today," he said. "It meant a lot, you coming out to see the ranch." "Thank you for inviting me," Tessa replied. "It was lovely." They stood there for a moment, the space between them charged with possibility. Then Kane reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and took her hand. He lifted it to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. "Good night, Tessa," he said softly. "Good night, Kane," she managed. She watched him ride away into the darkness, and the spot where his lips had touched her skin seemed to burn. The letters started arriving midweek, delivered by the mail coach that ran between Spokane and the surrounding ranches. They were not flowery or poetic, but they were honest and warm, filled with observations about daily life and questions about hers. Kane wrote about a calf being born, about fixing a fence line, about the first snow dusting the hilltops. He asked about the general store, about what she was reading, about whether Mrs. Patterson's cat had finally caught the mouse that had been plaguing the boarding house. Tessa found herself writing back with more ease than she expected. It was easier to be honest on paper, easier to admit to feelings and thoughts that would have been too vulnerable face to face. She told him about the nightmares that still woke her sometimes, about the way guilt could hit her out of nowhere like a physical blow. She told him about the small pleasures that were starting to matter again. Good coffee in the morning, sunshine on her face, the satisfaction of balanced account books. She also told him she was afraid of caring too much, afraid of failing again. Afraid that if she let herself be happy, something terrible would happen to punish her for daring to forget her guilt. Kane's response came 2 days later. "I cannot promise nothing terrible will ever happen," he wrote. "Life does not work that way. But I can promise that whatever comes, you will not face it alone, not if you let me stand beside you. As for guilt, I think it is like a wound. It needs to be cleaned and bound and given time to heal. Picking at it every day just makes it worse. Maybe it is time to let it start scarring over. Scars are still part of you, but they do not hurt the same way." Tessa read the letter 3 times, sitting in her small room with tears running down her face. Then she wrote back and told him he was right, and she was trying, and she was grateful he was patient. November came cold and sharp, with frost painting the windows white in the mornings. Kane continued his Saturday visits, and Tessa found herself waiting for them with an anticipation that was no longer tinged with guilt. When she saw him ride into town, her heart lifted. When he smiled at her, she smiled back without hesitation. They went on walks when the weather allowed, following the streets of Spokane out to where the town dissolved into wilderness. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's rhythms and patterns. Kane had a dry sense of humor that caught her by surprise sometimes, making her laugh when she least expected it. Tessa discovered she had opinions about things she had stopped letting herself care about, and Kane listened to all of them with genuine interest. One Saturday in late November, Kane arrived at the general store with a package wrapped in brown paper. "Early Christmas present," he said, handing it to her. "Or late birthday present if your birthday has already passed this year." "It is in March," Tessa said, taking the package with curiosity. "You did not need to get me anything." "I know. I wanted to." She unwrapped it carefully and found a book, its leather binding soft and well made. The title was embossed in gold, "Sonnets from the Portuguese" by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. "I asked the bookseller in Cheney what he recommended for someone who liked poetry," Kane explained, looking slightly uncomfortable. "He said this was good. If you do not like it, I can exchange it for something else." Tessa opened the book to a random page and read, "How do I love thee? Let me count the ways." Her throat tightened. "It is perfect, thank you. You are welcome." Kane relaxed slightly. "I know it is forward of me giving you love poetry, but I wanted you to have something that might make you think of me in a good way." She closed the book carefully and held it against her chest. "I think of you already," she admitted. "Often." His expression transformed into something so openly happy that Tessa felt her own heart swell in response. "Yeah, yeah," she confirmed softly. That night, lying in bed, Tessa read through the entire collection. When she reached the final lines, "I love thee with the breath, smiles, tears of all my life. And if God choose, I shall but love thee better after death," she closed the book and let herself acknowledge the truth she had been avoiding for weeks. She was falling in love with Kane Sullivan. Maybe had already fallen, somewhere in the space between his first kindness and this moment. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like relief. December brought snow and shortened days. The town prepared for Christmas with decorations and parties, and Kane invited Tessa to spend Christmas Day at the ranch with him and the Tanners. She accepted and asked Mrs. Patterson for help making a gift. Together, they sewed Kane a new shirt from fabric Tessa bought at the store, sturdy cotton in a blue that matched his eyes. It was practical and personal, and Tessa hoped he would understand what it meant, that she was investing in him, in them, in a future that included more Christmases together. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold. Tessa dressed in her best dress and wrapped the shirt in tissue paper, then climbed into the wagon Kane had sent to fetch her. At the ranch, the main house smelled of cinnamon and roasting meat, and a pine tree stood in the corner of the front room, decorated with strings of popcorn and paper stars that the Tanner children had cut. Kane greeted her at the door with a smile that made the cold journey worth it. "Merry Christmas," he said. "Merry Christmas," she replied. They exchanged gifts after dinner when everyone was stuffed full of turkey and pie. The Tanner children tore into their presents with gleeful abandon, and Mary and Jack exchanged practical gifts of knitted socks and a new pipe. When Kane handed Tessa a small box, her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was a cameo brooch, delicate and beautiful, the carved profile of a woman in pale relief against a dark background. It was the kind of jewelry a man gave to a woman he was serious about, the kind that spoke of intentions and futures. "It was my mother's," Kane said quietly. "My father gave it to her when they got engaged. I have been holding on to it for years, waiting to give it to the right person." His eyes met hers. "That is you, Tessa. If you will have it, have me." The room had gone silent. Mary Tanner was smiling, and even the children were watching with wide eyes. "Kane," Tessa said, her voice shaking. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I am," he confirmed. "I know it is fast by some measures, but I am 30 years old and I know my own mind. I love you, Tessa Reid. I love your strength and your honesty and the way you have survived things that would have broken someone weaker. I love the way you are learning to laugh again, the way you let yourself care even though it scares you. I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that you deserve every good thing this world has to offer." Tears spilled down Tessa's cheeks. "I killed my husband," she whispered. "How can you want me after that? You made an impossible choice in an impossible situation," Kane said firmly. "And you have punished yourself for it long enough. I want you, Tessa. Not in spite of your past, but including it, all of you. Will you marry me?" Every reason to say no crowded into her mind. She was damaged. She was afraid. She did not know if she could be a good wife, a good partner. She might fail him the way she had failed Robert, but Kane was not Robert, and she was not the same woman she had been 3 years ago. She had survived loss and guilt and her own worst thoughts about herself. She had learned to live again, slowly and painfully. And Kane had been there, steady and patient, showing her what it looked like to be loved without conditions. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Kane's whoop of joy startled everyone in the room. He swept her into his arms, careful of his still healing shoulder, and spun her around while the Tanners applauded and the children cheered. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, gentle and reverent and full of promise. It was Tessa's first kiss since Robert died, and it felt like coming home and stepping into unknown territory all at once. They were married in February 1883 in a simple ceremony at the Spokane church, with half the town in attendance. Tessa wore a new dress of ivory cotton that Mrs. Patterson and Mary Tanner had helped her sew, and Kane wore a suit that looked stiff and uncomfortable but made him devastatingly handsome. Reverend Walsh performed the service, speaking about love and commitment and the grace of second chances. When Kane slipped a gold band onto Tessa's finger and promised to love her in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, until death parted them, she felt the last pieces of her broken heart begin to knit back together. Moving to the ranch was an adjustment. The house was bigger than anywhere Tessa had lived before, and the work was different from storekeeping. Mary Tanner helped her learn the rhythms of ranch life, when to expect the men in for meals, how to preserve food for winter, what needed doing each season. Kane was patient with her learning curve, never critical when she burned bread or oversalted stew. More than that, he was present in a way Robert had never been. He talked to her about ranch business, asked her opinion on decisions, told her about his day and listened to hers. They fell into the habit of sitting on the porch after dinner, watching the sun set over the valley while they talked about everything and nothing. At night, lying in the bed they shared, Kane would hold her and tell her he loved her, and Tessa learned to say it back without fear. She loved him. It was different from what she had felt for Robert, deeper and more certain. Kane knew her worst parts and loved her anyway, and that made all the difference. Spring came with wildflowers carpeting the hills and calves wobbling on new legs. Tessa planted a garden, putting seeds into the earth and hoping for growth. She baked bread that actually turned out right. She learned to ride well enough to help move cattle from one pasture to another. She became friends with Mary Tanner and the other ranch wives in the area, women who welcomed her without judgment. One evening in April, she and Kane were on the porch watching the stars emerge when she said, "I think I am pregnant." Kane went very still. "You think?" "I am almost certain," Tessa clarified. "I have missed my courses twice now, and I have been feeling sick in the mornings." He turned to her, his expression a mixture of joy and concern. "How do you feel about that?" Tessa had been asking herself the same question for the past week. The answer was complicated. She was afraid, because pregnancy meant risk and childbirth could go wrong in terrible ways. She was afraid because she would be responsible for another life, and her track record with keeping people alive was not good, but she was also happy. Cautiously, carefully happy. "I am scared," she admitted, "but I am happy too. I want this baby, your baby, our baby." Kane pulled her into his arms and held her tight. "I am scared too," he said into her hair, "but we will face it together. And no matter what happens, I love you. That does not change." Dr. Pemberton confirmed the pregnancy in May and estimated the baby would come in late November or early December. He was an older man with a reassuring manner, and he listened carefully when Tessa told him about Robert's death and her fear of making another fatal mistake. "The laudanum situation was a tragedy," he said gently. "But it was not your fault. Pneumonia had already claimed your husband. What you did at the end was give him peace. As for this pregnancy, we will monitor you carefully. At the first sign of any problem, we will address it. You are young and healthy. The odds are very much in your favor." His confidence helped, but Tessa still found herself anxious as the months passed. Kane was endlessly patient with her fears, holding her when the nightmares came, reassuring her that she was strong enough for this. The baby came on December 2nd, 1883, in the bedroom Tessa and Kane shared. It was a long labor, painful and exhausting, but when Dr. Pemberton finally placed a squalling infant into her arms, Tessa felt something inside her chest expand to hold all the love she had not known she was capable of feeling. "A boy," the doctor announced with satisfaction. "Healthy lungs, all his fingers and toes. Congratulations." Kane, who had been pacing outside the room despite Mary Tanner's assurances that men did not belong at births, burst through the door and stopped short at the sight of his wife and son. "Tessa," he breathed, "are you all right?" "I am perfect," she said and meant it. "Come meet your son." He approached the bed with something like awe on his face, and when she placed the baby in his arms, Tessa watched her strong, capable husband transform into something softer. He looked down at his son with absolute devotion. "He is beautiful," Kane whispered. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months, weighing options and meanings. Now, looking at her son's scrunched face and dark hair, Tessa knew exactly what felt right. "Thomas," she said. "After your father, Thomas Robert Sullivan." Kane's eyes went bright with unshed tears. "Robert, after my first husband," Tessa confirmed. "He deserves to be remembered, and this baby deserves to carry both legacies." Kane leaned down and kissed her forehead. "You are the most extraordinary woman I have ever known," he said. "Thank you." For him, for choosing me. "Thank you for choosing me back," Tessa replied. "For teaching me that I deserve to be happy after all." The years that followed were not without challenges. Ranching was hard work, and weather and markets could be unpredictable. But Kane and Tessa faced everything as partners, making decisions together, supporting each other through difficulties. Thomas grew into a sturdy, cheerful child who loved horses and following his father around the ranch. When he was 3, Tessa gave birth to a daughter they named Catherine, after Kane's mother. 2 years later came another son, James, who had his mother's dark hair and serious eyes. Tessa learned to manage the ranch household with efficiency and grace. She became known in the community as someone reliable, someone who would help a neighbor in need without hesitation. The whispers about her past faded, replaced by respect for the woman she had become. Kane expanded the ranch over the years, buying adjacent land and increasing the herd. But he never let work consume him the way Tessa's first husband had. He made time for his family, for evenings on the porch with his wife, for teaching his children to ride and rope and care for the land. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Kane took Tessa back to the spot where they had first talked about marriage, the front room of the ranch house where he had given her his mother's brooch. The children were spending the night with the Tanners, giving them rare privacy. "I have been thinking about that first day you stitched up my arm," Kane said as they sat together on the sofa. "About how you looked so lost and so strong at the same time. I knew right then I wanted to know you better, wanted to see if maybe you might be the person I had been waiting for." "I thought you were crazy," Tessa admitted, "offering to deserve me when I could not deserve myself. I did not understand what you meant." "You understand now," she considered the question, looking around at the life they had built. The home filled with children's laughter. The land they worked together. The community they belonged to. The love that had grown deeper every year. "I think I do," she said finally. "You meant that love is not about deserving. It is about choosing. You chose to love me even when I could not love myself." You chose to stay when I gave you every reason to leave. You chose to believe I was worth the effort, and eventually I started to believe it too. Kane took her hand, his thumb rubbing over the wedding band she had worn for 10 years. You are worth everything, he said. Every effort, every moment, every choice I have ever made. Loving you has been the best thing I have ever done with my life. Tessa leaned into him, feeling the solid strength of his body against hers. I love you, she said, more than I thought I could ever love anyone. You saved me, Kane. You and this life we built. You showed me that happiness was not something I had to deserve. It was something I could choose, just like you chose me. We chose each other, Kane corrected gently. And I would make that choice again every day for the rest of my life. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn low in the hearth. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, dusting the valley white. Inside, warmth and love filled every corner. Tessa thought about the woman she had been when she first came to Spokane, hollow and haunted, convinced she deserved nothing but guilt and isolation. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone from a different life. The woman she was now understood that survival was not the same as living, and that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was let yourself be loved. Thank you, she said softly. For what? Kane asked. For not giving up on me. For seeing something worth loving even when I could not see it myself. For making me believe in happy endings. Kane kissed the top of her head. This is not an ending, he said. This is the middle of the story. We have got years ahead of us still. More adventures, more challenges, more memories to make. Good, Tessa said. I am not ready for the story to end. Neither am I, Kane agreed. They stayed there together as the snow fell and the fire dwindled to embers. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a love strong enough to weather anything. The years continued to unfold with the steady rhythm of ranch life. Thomas grew into a young man who shared his father's gift with horses and his mother's quiet intensity. Catherine was bright and bold, always asking questions and pushing boundaries. James was the peacemaker, the one who smoothed over conflicts and found middle ground. Tessa watched her children grow with a mixture of pride and bittersweet awareness of time's passage. When Thomas turned 18 in 1901, she looked at him and saw both the baby she had held and the man he was becoming. He had Kane's build and her determination, and she knew he would do well in whatever he chose. I want to stay on the ranch, Thomas told his parents over dinner one evening. Help run it, expand it maybe, if that is all right with you. Kane's smile was proud. More than all right. I hoped you would want to. Your grandfather and I built this place to last generations. It would mean everything to know you want to carry that forward. Catherine, 16 and restless, had different ideas. I want to go to college, she announced. Study botany, maybe become a teacher. It was unusual for a girl, especially a ranch girl, but Kane and Tessa had always encouraged their children to pursue their interests. If that is what you want, we will find a way to make it happen, Kane said. James, at 14, was still figuring out what he wanted. Can I just stay here and help out until I decide? He asked. You can stay here as long as you want, Tessa assured him. This is your home. Life was good. The ranch prospered. The children were healthy and happy. Kane and Tessa's love had deepened into the kind of partnership that needed few words, built on decades of shared experience and absolute trust. But life was also finite, and time moved relentlessly forward. In the spring of 1915, when Tessa was 52 and Kane 57, he started having chest pains. At first, they dismissed it as indigestion or the normal aches of a life spent working physically. But when Kane collapsed while mending fence in late May, Dr. Pemberton's younger replacement, Dr. Chen, diagnosed a weak heart. "There is not much we can do," Dr. Chen said gently. "Keep stress low, make sure he rests. But Mr. Sullivan, you need to understand that your heart is failing. It might be months, or it might be years, but it is coming." Kane took the news with characteristic calm. "Then I had better make the most of whatever time I have got," he said. He stepped back from the heavy ranch work, turning more of the operation over to Thomas, who at 32 was more than capable of handling it. Jack Tanner had retired years ago, and Thomas had hired new hands who knew their business. The ranch would continue without Kane's daily involvement. Instead, Kane spent his time with Tessa. They took long, slow walks around the property. They sat on the porch for hours, reminiscing about the past 32 years. They held each other at night and talked about all the things they were grateful for. "I am not afraid of dying," Kane told her one evening as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "I have had a good life, a full life. I have loved you and been loved by you, and that is more than most people ever get." Tessa's throat was tight. "I am not ready to lose you, I know. But when the time comes, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you will not let guilt eat at you again. You have been happy here with me, with our family. Hold on to that happiness. Let it carry you forward. I do not want my dying to steal the joy I spent decades helping you find." Tears streamed down Tessa's face. "How can I be happy without you?" "Because you are stronger than you think," Kane said. "Because our children need you. Because the ranch needs you. Because life is still worth living even when it hurts." He took her hand. "You taught me once that love means choosing someone even when they cannot choose themselves. Now I am asking you to choose happiness even when I am not here to remind you that you deserve it." "I do not want to," Tessa said. "I know, but you will because you are brave and stubborn and you know how to survive hard things." Kane kissed her hand. "Promise me, Tessa." "I promise," she whispered. Kane Sullivan died on a clear October morning in 1916, sitting in his favorite chair on the porch with Tessa's hand in his. One moment he was there, smiling at something she had said. The next, his breath simply stopped, as gentle and quiet as falling asleep. Tessa held him for a long time, memorizing the feel of his hand in hers, the lines of his face, the way the morning light caught in his hair. Then she kissed his forehead and called for Thomas. The funeral was large, befitting a man who had been a pillar of the community for over 40 years. People came from all over Spokane County to pay their respects, sharing stories about Kane's generosity and integrity. Tessa stood beside her children and accepted condolences with quiet grace, her grief a private thing she held close. In the weeks after Kane's death, Tessa waited for the crushing weight of guilt to descend. She braced herself for the whispers of her own mind telling her she should have done something different, should have saved him somehow. But the guilt did not come. Instead, there was grief, pure and clean and honest. She missed Kane with an ache that was physical, missed his voice and his laugh, and the way he looked at her like she was the best thing in his world. She cried when she found his shirt still hanging in the closet, when she turned to tell him something and found only empty space. But she did not feel responsible for his death. His heart had simply worn out after a full life. There was nothing she could have done to prevent it, and she knew that with a certainty that would have been impossible 34 years ago. Kane had taught her the difference between grief and guilt. Grief was love with nowhere to go. Guilt was a lie we told ourselves to feel like we had control over the uncontrollable. She grieved, deeply and without reservation, but she did not feel guilty. And slowly, as the months passed, Tessa found her way back to happiness. Not the same happiness she had known with Kane, but a different kind, quieter and tinged with loss, but still real. She spent time with her grandchildren, 7 of them now, ranging from toddlers to teenagers. She helped Thomas and his wife manage the ranch. She worked in the garden Kane had once tended with his mother, and she felt close to both of them among the growing things. Catherine came home from her teaching position in Seattle every summer, full of stories about her students and the life she was building. James had become a veterinarian, the first in the county, and worked with ranchers throughout the region. All three children were happy and settled, and Tessa took deep satisfaction in that. On the 5th anniversary of Kane's death, Tessa visited his grave on the small rise overlooking the valley, where she had buried him next to his parents. She brought wildflowers, the kind that grew along the creek, and arranged them on the headstone. "I kept my promise," she told him, sitting in the grass beside the grave. "I am still here, still choosing happiness. It is different without you, but it is still good. The ranch is thriving. The children are well. The grandchildren are growing like weeds. You would be so proud of all of them." She paused, looking out over the valley where cattle grazed and the creek sparkled in the afternoon sun. "I miss you every day, but I am grateful too. Grateful for every moment we had, every conversation, every sunrise we watched together. You gave me back my life, Kane. You taught me that I deserved to be happy, and you showed me what real love looks like. I will carry that with me for as long as I have left." A breeze stirred the grass, carrying the scent of pine and sage. Tessa closed her eyes and felt, just for a moment, like Kane was there beside her, his presence a warm and comforting certainty. When she opened her eyes, she was alone, but she was not lonely. She had the life they had built together, the love that still lived in their children and grandchildren, the memories that sustained her through the hard moments. She had promised Kane she would choose happiness, and she intended to keep that promise for as long as she drew breath. It was what he would have wanted. It was what she had finally learned she deserved. Tessa lived another 12 years, active and engaged until the very end. She died in her sleep on a warm summer night in 1933 at the age of 70, surrounded by family who loved her. They buried her beside Kane on the hill, reuniting them in death as they had been in life. The Sullivan Ranch continued through Thomas and his children, and their children after them, a living legacy of what Kane and Tessa had built together. The story of how they had met, how a cowboy had offered to deserve a woman who thought herself unworthy of happiness, became family legend, passed down through generations as a reminder that love was not about deserving but about choosing, and that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was let yourself be loved. And on the hill where they lay together, wildflowers bloomed every spring, a riot of color that painted the valley in shades of gold and purple and crimson, beautiful and alive and enduring.